the last dance on electrical safety. So anybody joining or on that doesn't know Catalyst Sales and Marketing, we're a local Atlantic Canadian agency. We connect global manufacturers to our local markets. We're a sales rep agency. I just want to take a couple of minutes to mention, a little housekeeping. You may hear some pitter patter in the background wherever everyone was working from home during these strange times. Historically, it's our 20th webinar, so our 20th installment of the Catalyst webinar series, and it'll also be our final webinar where things are starting to lift from these historic COVID times. Again, appreciate everyone for being here. Action-packed 30 minutes. We're going to try to bring new value to our customers during these difficult times. And I'd like to introduce our guest host today, Jon Travis of Leaf Electrical Safety. Jon co-founded Leaf Electrical Safety in 2016 to help electrical workers stay safe from electrical hazards. Leaf Electrical Safety provides arc flash studies to the industrial world all across North America and brings a practical and safety-based approach to something typically treated as a straightforward engineering exercise. And we're super excited to have Jon on here today. And Jon, without further ado, please take it away.
You joined. So what we want to do here today, focus a little bit, I guess, on arc flash studies, but what our goal is maybe to even back it up a step from there and just have a bit of a better understanding on what arc flash really is, more from a practical sense. You've probably seen lots of videos on YouTube, and I think 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, when arc flash sort of first came out on the scene, there was a lot of maybe fear tactics applied to it and things like that. And it's not something that we don't want to be fearful of, but we want to take a good approach, have a good understanding of what is arc flash actually, from the perspective of an electrical worker, because when it comes down to it, that's the most important thing. So where this fits in to, I think, the people that are listening today, is getting a good sense of what an arc flash actually is, how arc flash studies sort of tie into that, and then from the end user perspective, what all of that does in order to choose the right PPE and things like that. So from here, we just want to talk about, and maybe not from the most technical standpoint. If you look up a definition of arc flash, you'll probably read it and really be no further ahead as to actually understanding what happens. So here's kind of the way I like to think about it. If you could imagine yourself working in an industrial setting somewhere, you're working on an exposed, energized, maybe it's a 30 amp disconnect, and something goes wrong. And the things that can cause arc flashes are anywhere from, sticking your finger in the wrong place to putting a screwdriver where you shouldn't have, all the way up to water infiltration. Maybe it's just end of life of that piece of equipment because it's been operated so many times. Essentially, back to sort of the technical definition, they talk about a short circuit through air. But what's really going on is that that short circuit is something that the electrical system doesn't know how to deal with. So you can imagine, once you started, let's imagine we stuck the screwdriver in the wrong spot. Now we created this short circuit through the air. The way the system views that, you can picture like your top down big transformers, big utility feeding into the site, all of this energy sitting there, you know, waiting to turn motors on and things like that. An arc flash to the system just looks like a really big motor that needs to be turned on. So the system says, hey, I need to send some energy there. And the thing is that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And this happens instantaneously. It happens in, you know, a fraction of a second. But you basically get almost all the energy that that electrical system has. You get it to that 30 amp disconnect that you're working on, and you got it there in about, you know, half a second or less. So that 30 amp disconnect is not designed to withstand that much energy, that much current, that quickly. So that's when the arc flash happens. From the perspective of the electrical worker, we don't really care that much about what I just said. We don't really care how it happened. Once it happens, that's what we really need to focus on. So once it happens, what are we faced with? And it's not as straightforward as you might think. The first thing, and the reason we got the picture of the sun here, is, or at least I think that's the sun. You're getting about, they say, you know, 20,000 degrees C right off the bat. And that's almost something you can't even imagine how hot that must be, but they say it's about 4 times the surface of the sun. And this is a radiant heat energy. It's also accompanied by a fireball. But what's interesting, and you know, we'll get into this later with the PPE, with the arc rated clothing, you're really dealing with 2 hazards in one. Like if you took the fireball out of the picture, the person would still be burned. And that's from, you know, it's almost like getting a sunburn, probably the worst one you've ever had. And on top of that, though, there is a fireball. So you get a really bad sunburn and you've been lit on fire if you're not wearing the right clothing. The next thing that happens when you superheat copper or aluminum or whatever's in that compartment is you're dealing with a lot of light. So you might notice, or have noticed in the past, the tint on the arc flash shields, and that's protecting your eyes from the light primarily. It does offer a bit of protection from ballistics, but as far as I know today, there's still no way to really test the face shields for that. So we're really focused on the light. And, you know, I've heard stories, there's people have told me over the years, you know, they've been either in an arc flash or they were, you know, was people that they had worked with who were in an arc flash who had been, you know, at least temporarily blinded, maybe a day or so. And the worst one I heard was a guy was blind for about 3 weeks. Eventually, you know, got his eyesight back. On top of all of that, you know, you superheat copper. Let's just talk about copper. I think they say it expands about 60,000 times its original size. So you can imagine every single thing in that cabinet, it basically vaporizes, and then, you know, you're basically dealing with a grenade. A lot of, you know, little pieces of molten shrapnel flying through the air. So again, just kind of stacking up these hazards and what they really mean to the electrical worker who's standing there. Another thing they're going to be dealing with is copper vapor. So like I said, you vaporize this stuff, and now there's gases in the air that you could breathe in, and it's not going to be pretty. And I think the last one here that you need to be aware of is how loud this is going to be. So again, you expand copper 60,000 times its original size, it's going to make a little bit of a pop. And what they say is it would be the equivalent of standing next to a fighter jet, you know, as it sort of roared down the runway, and imagine standing there without any hearing protection on at all. So just kind of going back to where I started, you know, I find that a lot of people hear about arc flash and they know kind of what it is, but if you don't look at it from the perspective of how hazardous it really is, and when you're standing inside of one, you're basically engulfed in flames. You're exposed to this extreme radiant heat, so that's your sunburn heat. You've got loud sound, you've got the vaporous gases, the molten shrapnel, and a blinding light. Worst case scenario, you've got third-degree burns on your entire body. You're not wearing the right clothing, so you're actually on fire, and the burns are going to get worse. You can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and it's not pretty. So that's obviously something we want to focus on, helping people, make sure they stay away from that. The next thing that we want to think about, so that's if it happens, and if you happen to be standing there when it happens. The question is, well, when can this actually happen? And there's a lot of different ways. I mean, like I mentioned, like, you could even have like I saw one example was a snake. This must have been in South America somewhere. There's a snake like climbed into this switch gear and actually caused an arc flash. And luckily at that time, nobody was around. And then maybe there's water infiltration or corrosion over the years or something like that that causes an arc flash that sort of just kind of seems to happen on its own. But that's not really the ones we want to focus on, as much as the ones when we have somebody working on the equipment. Those are the times that you really want to focus. And so what we do, like, we'll do an arc flash study, but we also offer a bit of training. The training is not so much on what arc flash is and all those things. The training, more importantly, is on how it happens and how to deal with it. And the specific thing we want to concentrate on is when we're working on the equipment. Those are the times that if the arc flash happens, like if one happened to this guy right here, actually I just noticed in the picture, if anybody's paying attention, he's got his face shield flipped up. So if an arc flash happened right there, he's not protected. Interesting. But what we really want to do is we want to make sure that guy there or anybody else working on the electrical equipment understands how to assess the risk. And this is, in my opinion, probably the most important procedure that they would have to walk themselves through, is understanding, how do I do this job and make sure that I don't experience an arc flash while I'm doing it. And there's some key aspects here, and we'll just kind of walk through them. And then from here, just so everybody knows where we're going, I'll tie it back into what I started with on, what the arc flash studies are and why they're so important and how it works. But this is, in my opinion, this is what a worker needs to focus on. So the first thing, you're going into a job and you need to identify the hazards. Now, we're not talking much in this about shock hazard, but essentially with every electrical job, you've got two major hazards, one being shock and one being arc flash. So we're going to we're focusing today more on arc flash. But that's kind of the first step and pretty straightforward. The second one, though, is estimating the severity. So this is trying to get a handle on, if this thing happens, and we went through that in the beginning, all the different things that happen during an arc flash and how severe that could be. The second step of any risk assessment is, well, how bad could it actually be? And that's what we want to determine here. The next piece once we know, okay, we're dealing with an arc flash, we know it's going to be really bad. This is, you know, arguably the most important piece from the perspective of the electrical worker and his or her knowledge on how to assess this risk is estimating the likelihood. So, you know, we could probably do a whole other episode on this, but what they're looking for here is they're just trying to figure out, okay, I'm doing a specific task. Let's say it's testing and troubleshooting. During testing and troubleshooting, what's the likelihood that an arc flash could happen? And, you know, people might argue, well, it doesn't happen every day, it doesn't happen every month, it might not even happen every year. That's not really what we're looking at. All we're really looking for here is it possible that it could happen, or is it more likely than 0%? So there are a number of tasks where the likelihood is extremely low, and in those cases, we actually say, for these tasks, you don't need to wear any PPE, or you don't even need to treat it like a hazard because the likelihood is so low. So an example of that might be reading a panel meter on a piece of switchgear. You know, if you're just standing there, you're just reading the meter, you're not touching anything, everything's operating as normal, the likelihood there is so low that we would treat that as if there's no arc flash risk. But then other jobs such as testing and troubleshooting, things like that, where you've got the doors open, you're inside the gear, you're manipulating things, that's when the likelihood goes up to an unacceptable level. So if we've made it this far, and let's say that we do know we're dealing with an arc flash, the severity is very high, the likelihood is high enough that we're uncomfortable, so we want to deal with it. The next step is to determine what protective measures we're going to take. So for the most part, you know, there is, and I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the hierarchy of controls for safety. PPE is often treated as the last line of defense. And, you know, I would argue in the electrical safety world that it needs to be the first line of defense, because it doesn't matter what job you're going into. Even if you're going to de-energize the system, you cannot know for sure that system's de-energized until you've tested for absence of voltage. And while you're testing for absence of voltage, you're actually putting yourself at risk of an arc flash. So the PPE is so important, and it needs to be included in every single job. And then from there, you know, if there are engineering controls or administrative controls or anything else that you can add to that procedure or that job, well, that's fantastic. But, you know, just kind of going through it on a day-to-day basis, that's the thought process that an electrical worker needs to take. And that's, you know, 99% of the time is the answer to the whole question is, well, it's PPE. So where does the arc flash study fit in, and why would we want to do one? And where it fits in is during that thought process, the 4 steps to determine the risk of any job. There's 2 of them where the arc flash study makes life a lot easier. The first one is when we're estimating the severity, and the second one is when we're trying to determine what PPE we need. So the arc flash study gives you a value, and it's called the incident energy. And the incident energy is essentially a measurement of how hot can this arc flash actually get. And typically it's measured in calories per centimeter squared. Often that doesn't mean much to anyone when you think about calories per centimeter squared. It's kind of hard to imagine. But what they say is 1.2 calories per centimeter squared is the onset of a second-degree burn. So if you did an arc flash study and you labeled your equipment with incident energy levels, and you were getting numbers like 3 calories per centimeter squared, or 8 calories per centimeter squared, or 25 calories per centimeter squared, right up to who knows, 115. The one number you can hang your hat on is 1.2 calories per centimeter squared. And anytime you're dealing with anything higher than that, you're at least at risk for a second-degree burn. And don't forget, you still have the fireball, so your clothes are on fire. You can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and there's all this other stuff going on. But where the arc flash study comes in is figuring out how hot, what is the radiant heat energy that I'm going to be exposed to. Extremely important. The second thing it gives you is, it gives the worker an idea of how far away from this piece of equipment that they're likely going to be working and where that incident energy was calculated. It also gives you a boundary to keep everybody else outside of the work zone. So on that label, after the study's done, you'll know the arc flash boundary. And the arc flash boundary is actually the distance away from that equipment that you're working on that someone would actually be exposed to 1.2 calories per centimeter squared. So you probably want to keep them even a little bit further away from that boundary, but that gives you a sense of kind of how far away. So maybe on an example, you're working on an MCC bucket and you know that the incident energy is 8.3 calories per centimeter squared. So that's telling you what you need to have on for protection for PPE. And the boundary might say 10 feet. So you know that everybody else who's not wearing protection needs to at least be 10 feet away. And so those are kind of some of the details. Fundamentally, once you have the arc flash study completed, then you know exactly what PPE you need for the jobs. There is another way to figure this out, and if you're in Canada, it would be in CSA Z462, or in the US, it's NFPA 70E. In those standards, there's what's called, basically, it's called the table method, where you can determine the PPE for a specific job. But the thing is that you don't really know exactly what you're dealing with. It's based on assumptions, and it's based on, it's fairly conservative. So with the arc flash study, you can pinpoint exactly how much incident energy you're going to need, and then that correlates directly with what clothing do I need to wear. That's the first thing you get. The second thing that you get with an arc flash study that you can't figure out without doing it is, where are those high risk areas or high incident energy areas? And what I mean by that is, you might find you have a main breaker on a 600 volt lineup, and the incident energy on that breaker is 85 calories per centimeter squared. So up until the time you did the arc flash study, you always assumed that the 40 cal suit that you were wearing was fine. But you really don't know. You're really guessing up to that point. So this is, for me, it's those two things. It's knowing exactly what you need for PPE, and also being able to identify those high risk areas, which then can be mitigated. That this is where the engineering controls would come in. Like we were talking about earlier, you actually could maybe change fuse sizes, or you can start to work with the system and get those levels down to a reasonable number. And I think from here, I'm not sure, Eli, if there
Yeah,
was any questions or.
no, we've got the Q&A up. If anybody has some questions, please type it into your text box. You know, from here, John, I just wanted to know, I've got a question of my own. You know, I've always said that, or sorry, I've always thought that when a study's done, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how the study's done. Is it like when you're looking at a piece of equipment, do you look beyond the piece of equipment? Do you go like, do you go all the way out to the transformer? How does that look like when you're piecing it together at a facility?
Yeah, so you're starting at the utility, and then you're going down the system as far as you want. For the most part, we'll take it to the MCC level, because beyond there, the study just kind of gets out of hand as far as time and effort. But the numbers won't really change that much once you get out, maybe to like a local disconnect type. But yeah, you start at the utility. You want to figure out, how much energy do I have coming into the site. Then you're going to look at the main breakers the main transformers, and then just from there you look at this incoming switchgear lineup, and then the way it kind of works is with the arc flash, you have how much current or how much energy do I have going into wherever it's going, how long does it take to interrupt that current, and then how far away is the person probably standing from this explosion. So you have those three factors at any arc flash at any point of the system. So you really just like at the very first one, you're just looking at utility, and you're saying how much energy can come in here, and how fast, if something happened, is it going to trip. And then you go, through your main transformers down to the next piece of switchgear or whatever it is, and you just do that same thing again. You say, okay, the person's probably standing 36 inches away from this. If there was an arc flash in this compartment, how much energy is going to show up here, and how quickly is it going to extinguish? And then that's fundamentally, I guess that's what you're doing just over and over again throughout your entire system, to end up with all the different incident energy levels at all the different equipment.
All right. Thanks for that, John. John, I've got a question here popped up in the question box. Kevin asks, how useful are current limiting fuses in mitigating incident energy?
I would say under the right circumstances, they're very useful. I guess too, from a practical standpoint, you don't changing the fuses if you have fuses, and if you have the ability to do it, is a great solution, because you don't need to change your system drastically. You don't need to shut it down, and for a large shutdown, you still want to do a shutdown to install new fuses, but you're not tearing things apart and adding new components in that, which some of the other mitigation techniques are going to get into that. But yeah, I'd say as an option, we typically go to fuses first. That's because it's just the easiest thing to do, and it does a great job most times. Again, you got to run the numbers and look at it, but make sure that you're not causing nuisance trips or anything like that. Yeah, it's a great option.
All right. Well, we're slipping out on time here, so John, I want to thank you again for being on with us here and being our guest host.
Oh, thanks a lot, Eli. I really appreciate it.
And I'll just get you to push through to the ending slides. So I'd also like to give, some of our manufacturers just a little mention. DOCAP, PMMI, Fuse Tech, and Little Fuse. These are all manufacturers that work in the space of arc flash mitigation. You can get in touch with Catalyst via Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or visit our website at www.catalystsales.ca. And again, I want to thank everybody for being on with us. This is the 20th and final webinar in the Catalyst webinar series. And Jon, thanks again so much for joining us.